G'day, I'm Scotty North, and this is Xenium.Live, where we talk all things money, finance, and property. And we are back from a week of hiatus. Last week, I just decided to go walkabout through Queensland and didn't feel like doing any live streams. But I'm making up for it this week with two great guests. And on that note, I'd like to thank everyone who's watching us live now. You can ask questions if it's live in any of the comment boxes you see wherever this is in LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, all that sort of stuff. You can post comments there and questions. You'll be able to see them pop up and be able to answer them for you live. And thank you to everyone who's watching us again on repeat, and of course listening to us on the Xenium.Live podcast. So I mentioned we have two great guests, and today's guest, I'm told, is so well recognizable that he has to wear a disguise when he leaves his house. And not only that, his favorite form of image distraction is a mullet wig. I am, of course, talking about the Sherlock Holmes of property research, the founder of hotspotting.com.au, Mr. Terry Ryder. Terry, how you going, mate?
I'm really not sure, Scotty. After that introduction, I'm not sure where to go, but I'm feeling well. I'm feeling warm. Summer is upon us. I'm feeling, pretty energised by what's going on in real estate markets around Australia, which shows a story of many locations are heading into or are already in boom phases, and very competitive markets. Vacancy is very low, rents rising, prices rising. It's a story that's not really getting out in mainstream media so much because they're so obsessed with Sydney and Melbourne, and Sydney and Melbourne really aren't doing that to the same degree as the smaller capital cities and the regional areas, and it's particularly the regional areas that are very hot for all sorts of reasons at the moment. So it's keeping us very busy, keeping up with all of that, and also keeping up with demand from customers of various sorts who want reports so they can maybe take advantage of the growth that's happening in those places.
Well, that's kind of what we're here to talk about today. I mean, you've just recently released a new report, and I've got it on the screen here. Let's have a look-see. And it is called Australia's Infrastructure-Led Property Boom. And you've put in 10 hotspots in that report. So we're going to break down a handful of them today. But this is really interesting. I mean, you always talk about infrastructure. I mean, that's just one of the things that you do. You're very big on talking about infrastructure. But this report that I've got here is 120 pages, mate. This is probably, apart from your big report, there's the Ryder report or the annual one that you do, this has have to be the largest report I've seen you put out. This is exceptionally detailed with there's just so much information in it. I mean, obviously it takes you and your team a long time to do it, but what made you go to such lengths, or is it just the fact that there's so much information there?
Well, because it was necessary, because it's something that we see coming and we think people need to know about. The first point is, we're predicting a national property boom, and what we're also saying is we think that in many parts of Australia it's already underway, and that's supported not only by the anecdotal evidence from people at street level in many of these markets, but also by the data that's coming through on prices and rents and vacancy rates, supply and demand. But we think that the infrastructure-led economic recovery is going to make that even more so. It's going to touch a major movement towards a national property boom that's already underway, because it's very clear that federal and state governments intend that the recovery from the pandemic-induced recession is going to be primarily led by fast-tracking major infrastructure projects. It's not only about that, but it's a huge part of it. And that's hugely influential in all kinds of ways. Nothing pumps up real estate markets more than big spending on infrastructure. It makes places more attractive, more accessible, more amenable, but it also creates a lot of economic activity and jobs, and that from that comes demand for real estate. I think that infrastructure-led, the fast-tracking of anything that's near to shovel-ready is going to create also a resources boom, which some sources say is already underway as well, but it's certainly going to make that more certain because if you're building lots of new roads and rail lines, hospitals and universities, you're going to need lots of iron ore and a whole lot of other resources. So it's all very, very significant, and it's probably not yet been appreciated. That's why we thought we needed to do this report. It's something people need to know about. And then, okay, that's going to happen. Which places are going to show the most growth in real estate? So we found it very hard to select just 10, because we could have had a top 20 or a top 30, because there are so many places that are going to get uplift. But we selected 10, and I think they're all places that are worthy of note by property investors.
All right. Well, let's have a quick look at the report and have it. I mean, let's pick a handful here of locations to have a bit of a dig deep into, Terry. So I'm going to scroll through, and you've got the summary and an introduction, and then we've got a few of the places that we're going to go and talk about now. So the first two that you mentioned you wanted to have a word about was the Badgerys Creek and Blacktown. Now, you said you want to sort of talk about them together as a whole, so let's do that. I mean, tell us, obviously, for anyone that has a bit of a clue about this area, that is the airport site, the second airport site for Sydney. But is that the only reason it's in there, or is there something, a lot more than that?
There is a lot more, and that's why both those places are there. They're both part of the Western Sydney economy, which is one of the great growth economies in Australia. It's I can't remember whether it's the third or fourth largest economy in Australia now, and it's become increasingly significant, and infrastructure spending is a big part of it. The new airport's very important, but it's not the only thing happening out there. The most important thing about the airport is not so much the planes that are going to be landing and taking off, but what will spring up around it. They're calling it the Aerotropolis. And what we know to be true is that in all of our major cities, wherever there's a major airport, there's a huge industrial commercial precinct around it. It becomes a massive jobs node. I think the biggest jobs node in Brisbane is what they call the Australian Trade Coast precinct, which is because it's not only near the international airport, but also the Port of Brisbane. And that's the biggest jobs node, not the CBD of Brisbane, but the Australian Trade Coast commercial precinct near the two ports. So this airport is going to create a massive jobs node. It's going to create lots of infrastructure because there will need to be road links and rail links to it. So that's going to pump up markets that are nearby, like Blacktown City, for example. And but there are other things, like the state government announced about a month ago they're going to be spending $1 billion on the CBD of Mount Druitt, which is a suburb of Blacktown City. And there's a lot more. There's a lot more happening in terms of hospital upgrades, expansion of education facilities, upgrades to rail and road links, but a lot of it's going to be generated by the airport and the associated infrastructure. So yeah, it's going to be a compelling market. I would say as background that Sydney and Melbourne both had property booms from 2013 to 2017, approximately, and really nowhere else in Australia did. It was portrayed in media as a national property boom, but it wasn't. It was really those two big cities. And the reason they did, and Brisbane didn't, and Perth didn't, Perth was actually going backwards, was because there was so much being spent on infrastructure, particularly in Sydney, and like the Northeast Rail Link, for example, and many other things. They've just opened the new tunnel, which is connecting. There was a missing link when you're heading north from Sydney to head up the Central Coast. There was a big missing link. They've just opened the tunnel, a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure project that's going to bridge that gap. And Sydney, it rolls on in Sydney with what's happening out in Western Sydney, and it's hugely influential. It's the primary reason why Sydney had that property boom, but other capital cities didn't. And so very significant.
Yeah, and we often talk about vacancy rates. I mean, this is the table in the report here. Badgerys Creek, I mean, 0%.
Yeah,
Holsworthy, 0.5%.
Yeah, and this is common around Australia. In fact, the fact that some of those postcodes have got vacancy rates above 2% is a little bit unusual, because mostly it's 1.5, 1%, 0.5 across Australia. And this is at a time when Sydney's overall vacancy rate is 3.5%, 4%, depending on whose figures you believe. And that's largely inner city Sydney, where vacancies are high. But other parts of Sydney, like this precinct, very, very low. And that's a significant factor for for investors, for everybody. There's a shortage of rental properties. There's a crisis really in Australia, and that's one example of it. There's just not enough available for rent. That means rents are rising. When rents are rising strongly, prices, sale prices do follow. We've seen that. That's something we know to be true. It's a pattern in the market that we've observed over decades. So it's very significant in areas where vacancies are that low, and something for investors. It's a good leading indicator. Most of what you get in media is backward-looking indicators. They tell you what's happened to prices in the last 12 months, but it doesn't inform the future, whereas vacancy rates do help you get a glimpse of the future, because if your vacancy rate is 0.5%, you're going to have rising prices in that area, and that's inevitable.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I really like using vacancy rates as an indicator of that forward-looking and obviously current forecast. I think it's very important. All right, so moving on, our next spot that we wanted to have a look at was the Hunter region, I believe. So that's a decent sized region, Terry. So take us through what's going on there.
Well, as if people can see the words on the screen there, it makes the point that the Hunter region, just outside Newcastle, which is a very important regional city. It's bigger than many of our capital cities, and it's the largest regional economy in Australia, and it's very diverse. It's in the news because Labor's squabbling over climate change policy. It really comes out of the Hunter region. Job was given as the member for Hunter, and he knows that many jobs in the Hunter region are dependent on the coal industry, and that's a problem. But in terms of climate change policy, but in terms of the local economy, it's an important creator of economic activity and jobs. But there's also lots of other things happening there. There's agriculture. There's the massive horse, and it's one of the major horse breeding and training locations in Australia. There's a massive wine industry. There's lots of different things happening there. So it's got diversity, but the infrastructure spend is very significant. $3 billion in transport upgrades. There's just the Singleton bypass alone, which has been funded recently by state and federal governments. Just in the last month, that was announced, $700 million project in just one project. So all of that's putting the Hunter region back on the radar screen. Very affordable. You can see some of the typical pricing also on the screen for some of the suburbs that make up the Hunter region. So for an investor, that's a very affordable place to buy in an area that's got, always has strong demand, but it's going to grow because of, those highlights that are on the screen there, resources projects, transport upgrades, development of housing estates, and just the diversity and strength of that economy. It's an important place in Australia, and right next door to Newcastle, very significant city with a major airport and a whole lot more. So, yeah.
So what we've seen so far is obviously the Blacktown, the airport area. I mean, that's a massive infrastructure project, and then there's all the related infrastructure that's around it. So I mean, it's not just for the airport in terms of for freight. It can be a processing plant for anything else that goes there. It can be for the workers, it can be for the housing around there. So there's a lot of things that come when a new big piece of infrastructure happens. Seeing it's almost like a feeder to that area. And it was the same thing with this Hunter region. I mean, with Newcastle as kind of like the port hub, I mean, everything else becomes a bit of a feeder and a processing system for that major piece of infrastructure that's already there.
And the thing about the Hunter region, we've published two major new reports. The other one was the Exodus to Affordable Lifestyle. The Hunter region is also a great fit for that as well. So it's going to get pumped up by two very significant national trends, because it's a wonderful lifestyle region as well, affordable, close to a big city, not that far from Sydney. Wine, people, hill change areas that got a wine industry. That's an extra element that people love from a lifestyle viewpoint. So Hunter's a special place for a couple of reasons at the moment.
Yeah, so let's take a look at this. We've got the vacancy rates. I mean, they're all really, really low. Really low.
Yeah. And if we went through every one of our reports that we have currently on the shelf, Scotty, we'd be seeing vacancy rates like that right across Australia, and it's ridiculous. I mean, that means that there's so little available for rent that whenever anything comes up for rent, there's people competing for it. There'll be 40 or 50 people queuing up outside the open house, offering well above the asking rent to try and secure it, or offering to pay 6 months in advance. We're hearing all sorts of stories like that from around Australia. But Hunter region is one of those places. You know, we're at 0.4%, 0.8%. It's actually a crisis from the view. It's a crisis.
Well, it is.
But from the viewpoint, from the singular viewpoint of property investors, it's an opportunity, because those are the sorts of places where you could profitably buy a home or build a new one, get a new house and land package, and you'll be offering not only a property to a market that's starved of rental properties, but a new one with all the mod cons, and you're going to be able to get a very, very good rent for it in locations like that have such low vacancies. Great opportunity for investors at the moment. And it can't change any time. That's one of the factors, Scott. It's not easy to turn that around, because it takes time to build new houses, and there's all sorts of reasons why we've got to this point. And to turn that ship around and start getting back to a point where we maybe have 2 or 3% vacancies, which is a nice balanced market, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take years to correct. So there's opportunity there in the short to medium term for investors.
Yeah, look, I totally agree with that. Now, the Hunter area, I like that area as well. Toowoomba. Now, Toowoomba probably would have been based on one of your reports a fair while ago, mate. I mean, we went out there for clients. We did some new construction and did some established home buying, probably almost 8 years ago. Back a while before that bypass was even sort of in the news. So we were out there, and then we pulled out probably 18 months or so after that. But it's back on the cards, and I like Toowoomba. I think it's an agriculture powerhouse west of Brisbane. If you don't know where it is, check it out on a map. But Terry, it's in this report, and I have purposely not gone through a lot of detail in the reports, because firstly, I think people should be buying a report, even though we're talking about it. We're just giving some high level stuff. But I wouldn't mind digging into a bit of stuff here on just picking the one on Toowoomba, because there is a lot of infrastructure being spent here. So, you know, obviously it's in the report for that reason, but tell us what you love about Toowoomba.
Well, it's going to be a growth market and a growth economy. That's for certain, because we know what's already there, but what's building in the near future. One of the things I really like about it is it's not hot yet, and many of the places that we might talk about, because you know, there's what I see as a national property boom building already in some places. Incredibly strong competitive markets already. This place is really just getting started, so that's the opportune time for investors to buy before it gets hot. And this is one of those places. It's just starting to move after, you know, several years. It became a victim of its own success previously, and I think developers piled into Toowoomba half a dozen years ago and probably built too much, and vacancies were high. But right now, it's just another one of those places. The vacancy rates in the main postcodes for Toowoomba are 0.5% and 0.2%. And that is even more ridiculous than the Hunter Valley. And it's going to get worse before it gets better, because of what's coming up. One of the important things that recently happened was the new airport, and that's been massively influential. So it was a privately built airport, but it means that there's now direct flights from Toowoomba to some of the most significant cities in Australia, which they didn't have before, and it's allowed them to snare the Qantas Pilot Training Academy, which is probably not relevant right at this moment, because Qantas isn't flying very many places, but in normal times it's going to be, you know, it's an important thing for a city like Toowoomba to get. So it's got that new airport, and that's an important thing for business, but also it's got the inland rail link coming. It's a piece of infrastructure that's costing almost $10 billion. It's not just being talked about by politicians, it's already well underway. They're actually now building like the second major phase, which is in regional New South Wales, heading up towards Narrabri, which isn't that far south of the Queensland border. And the next phase will be Toowoomba, which is the pivotal point in Queensland for the Inland Rail link. So it's going to make that, plus the new airport, is going to make Toowoomba a city of very great strategic importance. And then you've got on screen there some of the major projects that are underway or proposed for Toowoomba. And it's quite a long list. And when you put it all together, it's many billions of dollars of investment in a city that's we like, because it's got a diverse economy. It's got manufacturing. You mentioned agriculture, but also resources. I mean, it's the capital city for the Surat Basin Resources Precinct, which is very important resources products in Australia, particularly for gas, which the federal government likes. Doesn't make we won't go into environmental issues. That's for another day, but it's very important economically. It's also a government administration centre. It's got a tourism industry that's very strong. Toowoomba is renowned for its parks and gardens and its annual carnival.
Flowers. Flowers, Terry.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good place. I mean, you and I know it pretty well because it's not too far from where we live. But I don't know how well Toowoomba is known in other parts of Australia, but it's a very important. I think it's our Australia's second largest inland city. And if we just scroll down, we can see the current population of the Toowoomba local government area is 160,000, and it's projected that it'll grow to above 200,000 in the next 15 years. So there's a lot coming up. And if we look at the page with the prices, there's been some price growth in some of the suburbs, and it's 4 or 5%. One's grown 8%, another 13%. But generally speaking, it hasn't really got on its growth path. It's just really starting to build. So it's an opportune time to be looking into Toowoomba, where you can buy good houses in the 300,000s and get rental yields that are maybe sort of 5.5%, with very, very low vacancy. So those yields are likely to rise. Yeah. Opportune because it hasn't had the boom yet, but it's coming. I'm quite sure it's coming to Toowoomba.
And I'd just like to say that airport really is something else. If you haven't had a chance to go check it out, it's pretty impressive. You sort of come over the hill and you go, whoa, there's an airport in the middle of nowhere, right? Just absolutely created out of the dirt. And it's a pretty interesting thing to go and see. And what it's done is, like what you talked about with Blacktown and what have you, is that now there's all this infrastructure because there's that big piece of almost like the anchor infrastructure. Then the sheds pop up and the other businesses pop up, and now the other businesses supporting those businesses pop up, and it just creates this whole ecosystem of self-fulfilling prophecy when they go and put out one big anchor piece of infrastructure there.
Yeah. I mean, airports are like that, and just this huge employment node springs up around people who have a reason to be close to airports. And the thing is, for national businesses, looking for places where they can set up their big distribution networks. Where can we go where the land is cheap, much cheaper than the big cities? It's got a major airport and it's got major rail links. Well, Toowoomba starts to tick a lot of boxes for that sort of thing. So serious businesses are going to be moving there for that reason. And that'll create jobs, and of course the jobs will create demand for real estate. So in a city where vacancy rates are well under 1%. So yeah, look out. Toowoomba is about to become one of those places that you probably wished you owned real estate in.
And it's got good flowers, I'll say it again. All right, so the final one that we want to talk about today is a little bit close to my home, literally, and we're talking about the Sunshine Coast. It's something that Terry's talked about for, it's got to be close on 12, 18 months now, Terry, that you've had this as almost Australia's #1 location. And I've got to keep asking you, is it just because you live relatively nearby, or does it actually have a good reason?
Oh, look, I'm glad you asked me that question, Scott. All of our report, we always take a positive outlook. There's ample negativity in media. We don't need to add to it. So our outlook is always positive, but we think balanced. Most of our reports are telling people the good places to buy, but we have one report that tells people the places to avoid, and that's called the no-go zones. And half a dozen years ago, the Sunshine Coast, not far from where I'm currently sitting, was in that report because we felt it was not a good place to buy. It was just a tourism market, and tourism markets are very vulnerable, very fickle, not a place that you get sustained long-term capital growth. So now it's our number one pick in Australia. What's changed? Well, infrastructure spending has been the difference. $20 billion plus of infrastructure spending, which is still a work in progress, but it's created new industries. It's made the Sunshine Coast not just a tourist town, but a serious city. I would argue it's an international city. It's got an international airport as a result of the $500 million upgrade that's just been completed. It's going to have the subsea cable, the fastest internet links from anywhere in Australia to Asia. It's got a world-class medical precinct that wasn't there 3 years ago, $2 billion hospital, plus a whole lot more around it. A new CBD is being built from the ground up. There's just so much, and it's transformed the economy. It's made it a compelling growth economy and a place that people are moving to from other parts of Australia to work in the new hospital, in the new CBD. Serious businesses are moving to the Sunshine Coast. There's an annual award. I can't remember the exact name of it, but every year they have an award for the world's most innovative city. And first they create a short list of 7 locations. And last year, Sunshine Coast made the shortlist. Didn't win the award, but it was in competition with places like Chicago in the US, the Taipei, the capital of Taiwan. But it was ranked as one of the 7 most innovative cities on the planet, which was testimony to the fact that the Sunshine Coast has been transformed from this sleepy tourist town into an international city, and that's why we rate it so highly now. And it's all been achieved by infrastructure spending, and that's the significant thing. That's why it's a great case study in why we rate infrastructure spending so highly as a generator of economic growth, and out of that, growth in property. So,
and back to what we talk about a lot on this show, especially today, vacancy rates. I mean, they're pretty low as well. I mean, when 2% is a balanced market, 1% is unbalanced, and you're getting down to as low as 0.4%. I mean, once again, it's not zero, but it's close enough.
Well, the industry regards 3% as equilibrium balanced. Anything below that's heading towards undersupply. When you're below 1%, it's ludicrous, and it is, because I know people who are looking and just can't find places, and it's like, what do they do? Where do they go? It's a crisis, a shortage crisis in rental accommodation. But again, for property investors, it's a massive opportunity. And what we know from the lending figures is that the momentum in markets around the country that currently exists is coming from owner-occupied buyers, first-home buyers and other types of owner-occupiers, and investors aren't particularly active. And you've got to wonder why. They're just missing opportunity. Maybe they believe the headlines that said property prices are going to collapse, and they were waiting for that to happen and to buy cheaply. Well, it hasn't happened, and it won't happen. They're actually heading in the other direction. And it's just to give more credibility to my forecast of a national property boom, it's now coming, those forecasts are now coming from the big boys and girls. Westpac and ANZ have both in recent weeks made their forecast for next year, and they're forecasting very strong. They're both admitting, hey, we got it wrong when we said prices would drop 20%. Yeah. It hasn't happened. This is what we now think will happen. And they're forecasting big growth in the next 12 months. We think.
Yeah, I read one, I think it was, I don't know if it was NAB or ANZ this morning, had said they've revised their forecast from negative 10% to positive 9%. I mean, that's a 19%, turnaround. That's a big deal.
I know. Let's face it, economists don't really know too much about residential property. They quite often get it wrong. But so they're now admitting they did get it wrong, and they're seeing that we're heading into a period of growth. There's going to be the Reserve Bank just in the last few days also observed that the economic recovery is going to be more dramatically positive than they previously had thought, and all the stimulus is out there in the market. The fact that the virus is pretty much under control in Australia, notwithstanding the recent smallish outbreak in Adelaide, which we hope will be kept that way. We're seen as the world as one of the safest places to be because we got this thing under control way better than Europe or the United States. And expats are wanting to come back to Australia. That's going to pump up markets. Once they're allowed to, people are going to be migrating here in droves. So we've got a lot of uplift coming, and I just think investors need to be taking some action now. It's no longer a case of sitting on the fence and waiting to see what happens. It's already happening. What you're waiting to see is already happening. So it's time to get on board, I would suggest.
Yeah, look, I agree. So just on this Sunshine Coast section, I mean, you've got this little table here. I mean, is that right? 25 schools in the Caloundra South area? I mean, look at the jobs, 20,000 jobs, 9,000 jobs, 45,000 jobs. I mean, the thing is just going off.
Well, I mean, we're talking about over time, but I mean, they're not building a housing estate; they're building a city. I mean,
yeah,
50,000 residents when they built the whole land holding. That's a small regional city. Toowoomba's about 100,000, so it's a substantial city just in one development. So yes, they will need those schools, and of course, all of that as they make land releases, and they build the shopping centres to go with the land releases that are already sold and occupied, and the schools. That just keeps generating. It just becomes this economy within itself. And the Sunshine Coast has got a number of those things underway on top of all the other infrastructure that we talked about.
Well, on that note, I want to talk about, you and I both on the same page that I think investors should be capitalising at this time. I mean, going through the COVID time, I was very cautious on, waiting till the lockdowns were sort of starting to end and that sort of thing. And we made that very public in the information we put to our clients in our database. But I'm very much now saying that if we're going to see these things continue as we are, then there is some serious action to be had in these markets. Don't sit back and wait for property prices to tank, because at this point in time, I'm not seeing it. And I'm not necessarily a big property bull. I try and see it and speak it how it is. But at the end of the day, we're not seeing that. In fact, every bit of data I'm seeing in both the stocks and shares market, financial markets and property markets is saying the opposite, which is kind of counterintuitive in some regards. But Terry, I think investors need to get back in and capitalise on this sooner than later.
Yeah, and there's great opportunities, particularly in regional Australia. And the trend that's driving these markets to be so strong as they are were underway before we even heard of COVID-19. Some of them have been growing strongly for 2 or 3 years already. It's just that the pandemic and the loss, etc., have exacerbated that trend because it's all about technology and the ability to work remotely. That's what's really the driving, and people realise, well, we chose to live in the big city for our work, and it's expensive, it's congested. We spend 2 or 3 hours a day commuting. We'd like a better lifestyle, and if we can achieve that at half the price in a regional centre while working remotely through technology, then that's what we want to do. And people have been making that choice for a number of years now, and but it's been turbocharged by the pandemic and the lockdowns, particularly in Melbourne, and so it's become what was a steady drift has now become a stampede, and the numbers are quite compelling. So that's why we've got booming property markets in regional centres like the Sunshine Coast, like the Hunter region we talked about, places like Ballarat and Victoria. That's got a second wave of demand. So it's just rocking on and on. And there's dozens and dozens of other locations that also are good examples of it, and great opportunities again for property investors. There's certainly not going to be any price decline in these places anytime in the foreseeable future. The opposite is happening.
Yeah, that's a good point. And look, if you are a property investor and want to capitalise in these areas, I mean, that's the service that we provide. you definitely need to jump on to the Property Hotspot website, which is www.propertyhotspot.com.au, and that will take you straight through to the web page. And that website is specifically set up to help investors buy property in Terry's hotspot locations. So our locations that are identified by Terry Ryder and his research team, we take them at Property Hotspot and we only facilitate properties in those areas. So to have a quick look at that, we've got here on the website now some examples. We've got 20 examples on there of property. And we've got Sunshine Coast, we've got Moreton Bay region, which is in Terry's top 10 location report. We go down, I think we've got Ballarat. We've got the Caloundra South, which is just what we're talking about with the 25 schools and the 50,000 residents. And we've got Adelaide. And of course, anything else that we're compiling at the moment is coming on in these infrastructure locations as well. We've got our builders being screened in Toowoomba as we speak. We've got options down at the Hunter region coming online through one of our builders partners that are already there on our panel. So this is what needs to happen. If you want to capitalise in these areas that Terry's located and said, okay, there's going to be these billions of dollars spent on infrastructure and I want to make sure I have a piece of that, why wouldn't you want to have a piece of pie where the public purse is spending money in an area and you're getting the value uplift on that? I mean, we know, I've talked about it before, Terry, the reports are anywhere between $2 and $3 per dollar spent. So if an infrastructure project goes in at $1 billion, we're looking at between $2 and $3 billion of property value uplift in the greater area surrounding it just because of that infrastructure spent. I mean, why wouldn't you want to capture some of that uplift? That is the place to invest based on the infrastructure and in the hotspot locations. What do you reckon?
Well, yeah, I mean, because of the infrastructure spend and the other factors that cause us to rate a location as a top 10 hotspot, there's going to be capital growth in these places. But as we've pointed out, as we've gone through some specific locations, the vacancies are so low that rents are rising strongly. So if you're creating a new house and land package as an investor, you're going to be getting a top rental, because you're creating a new property with all the mod cons. You're going to be getting a good quality of tenant because you're providing a new property, but also because there's going to be so many applicants in the current circumstances, you're going to be able to command a top rental, probably higher than you would imagine. And people are having that experience around the country at the moment. I've had it myself as an investor. We're projecting a certain rental in my initial feasibility study for a property, and then finding that when it's put out to the market, getting way above what the initial projection was, because there's just such a shortage and there's so many people lining up to want to rent a place when it becomes available. So it's a real opportunity to tick a lot of boxes that investors know. A growth market that's going to give capital growth. Rental shortage, so you're going to get a high rental and a good rental return, and a new property that's going to be low maintenance and have great depreciation benefits. So ticking a lot of boxes for people at the moment.
Yeah, look, I think so too. Terry, unfortunately, I know you're really upset about this, but we're out of time. We've got to stop talking.
God. Okay, well, I always say the hard part is getting me to shut up when the subject is residential property. But, it's such a compelling topic at the moment. There's just so much happening that's dynamic and exciting and interesting around Australia at the moment. So, always have a talk about it.
Yeah, no, that's good. Look, I very much appreciate you coming on once again, and I think you're joining us in a month's time for our end of year show, which is some pretty exciting news coming about that shortly. I know that you are super excited to be once again joining me on the silver screen, Terry.
I am agog with excitement. I may not be showing it on my face right now, but I am.
Yeah, see, I knew it. I can tell. All right, that's Terry Ryder from hotspotting.com.au, and that's just a reminder, visit him on his webpage. That's hotspotting.com.au. Make sure you hit him up, check it out. You'll see the panel partners that he's got on there. So Property Hotspot is on there as well. And you can download and purchase and download any of his amazing reports he's got on there, including today's report, which was the infrastructure report and the massive property boom coming off the back of that. It's a 120-page report. It is very much worth the purchase and download because it is pretty much one of the best reports I've had on this topic that I've seen quite a number of years. All right, so that's it from us today. So make sure you check out Terry at hotspotting.com.au. Check us out in our property buying service in the hotspot locations, which is propertyhotspot.com.au. So it's propertyhotspot.com.au. Click on there. You can always call us and we will be able to sort it out for you directly. 1300 667789. So that's 1300 667789. And you can hit us up on any of those websites you mentioned with the contact us pages. Or, of course, you can hit us up at hello@Xenium.Live. All right. There you go. That's all the ways to get a hold of us, and we'll be able to help you buy in these hotspot locations and actually take good advantage of someone else's spending money in the area, and you're going to benefit as the landlord. So why the heck wouldn't you want to do that? All right, that was today's guest, the magnificent, the maestro himself, Terry Ryder from hotspotting.com.au. This has been Xenium.Live, where we talk all things money, finance, and property. And I've been your host, Scotty North. Till next time.